Alrighty, everybody, welcome. We are continuing our reading of Thomas Jefferson. It's been a great book so far, very concise, lots of interesting fact nuggets that really enlighten you to the total context of that time period and the character of Jefferson. So we're on page 122 towards the bottom. Their first battle together was waged in Virginia over freedom of religion. As a student of William Smalls at William and Mary, Jefferson had become a reader of several Enlightenment-era skeptics about traditional Christianity. Madison shared Jefferson's convictions about the necessity of freedom of conscience. Jefferson had come to believe the apostolic faith was superstitious and therefore unreasonable, one of the most damning of Jefferson's indictments. It's true that some ministers, they go above and beyond what's written in the Bible to a point that you're just like, are you just making this up? You know? In his Notes on the State of Virginia, a book written a few years after his service revising the laws in the General Assembly, Jefferson was honest about his state's abysmal record on liberty of conscience. It was a crime in Virginia not to baptize infants in the Anglican Church. Now that's pretty sad. I know a lot of Native Americans really wondered about that. It's really strange. But even though, okay, so this is like on the books law, but even in certain cultures, there's that peer pressure, so I guess you can find that all over the world, right? Dissenters were denied office, civil or military. Wow, so if you didn't baptize your kid, you couldn't even serve in the military? I will be in an office in the military. That's crazy. Children could be taken from their parents if the parents failed to profess the prescribed creeds. That's horrific. That is horrible. It was said that James Madison heard Baptist ministers preaching from prison in these years. The church was all too evidently an institution as susceptible to corruption as any other. True. In 1767, Jefferson was involved in a case in which the parishioners of St. Anne's in Albemarle, the Monticello parish, sought to remove the Reverend John Ramsay for drunkenness and the attempted seduction of a woman not his wife. One allegation that Ramsay got drunk with the sacrament wine. That is a very funny, yet sadly true stereotype. Though Jefferson had long cultivated a skeptical religious worldview, he undertook his work in the General Assembly because of freedom, not because of a lack of faith. In political terms, Jefferson believed it unjust and unwise to use public funds to support an established church and to link civil rights to religious observance. Yes, your civil rights should come regardless of your religion, because this is something quite different, right? It's quite different. Especially if you're in a place where everyone's mixed, especially today. And then public funds, yeah, you don't want somebody who's a Mormon having their money go towards the Church of Satan. You don't want, if you're a Hindu, you don't want your money going towards the Tibetan monks, right? I understand. Makes sense. He said such a system led to spiritual tyranny. He could have a solid point. In theological terms, according to notes he made on John Locke, Jefferson concurred with a Christian tradition that held the church should not depend on state-enforced compulsion. Summarizing Locke, Jefferson wrote that our Savior chose not to propagate his religion by temporal punishments or civil incapitation. Had Jesus chosen to do so, it was in his almighty power to enforce belief. Instead, he chose to extend it by its influence on reason, thereby showing to others how they should proceed. Leading by example instead of forced compulsion. Now, this is tricky. Okay? If you voluntarily go into, like, let's say the Amish community, right? And you think you're gonna bring porn and drugs and techno music and gangster rap and all that crap into that community, I believe they have a right to be like, no, you're out of here. You agreed to come into our little area. You are an American citizen. True, you have your American citizen rights of the country. But in this community, we do X, Y, and Z, right? So I understand that. I get it. It is quite interesting. Temporal punishments. Yeah, so it's quite interesting when you think about it. Now, let's see. On here on the bottom it says, objection, religion will decline if not supported. Answer, gates of hell shall not prevail. Okay, so the objection, oh, I see the proceeding, alright. It did not speak well of the power of God, in other words, if he needed a human government to prop him up. No. God doesn't need a human government to prop him up. It is going to help humans to regulate themselves in a system that was told to them for their own benefit, right? No, God doesn't need human government. He doesn't need paper pushers and, people who give you tickets for parking too long, or the DMV, right? However, human organization matters, right? How you take care of the people. And a leader who fears their Lord hopefully would have more of a conscience and begin to assume that I better live right, because if I do horrible things to my people, that's going to count against me, and I'm going to have to pay for all those people whom I hurt. Like, for sure, Joseph Stalin is burning in the underworld. He's just being fried. I mean, what he did to people was truly, truly tragic, right? Whew. Now, we could go even deeper into that. What do you think? Dissenters across Virginia petitioned the Assembly for relief from the legislated fealty to the Anglican Church in the autumn of 1776. The cries for religious liberty, Jefferson recalled, brought on the severest contest in which I have ever been engaged. Edmund Pendleton and Robert Carter Nicholas, honest men but zealous churchmen, called them supported the established church. It took incremental legislation in several years, but in the end, in 1786, a statute for religious liberty from Jefferson's pen became law. Okay, in 1786. The bill, Jefferson said, was meant to comprehend within the mantle of its protection the Jew and the Gentile, the Christian and the Mohammedan, so I think he means Muslim, the Hindu and the infidel of every denomination. Yeah, that's one blessing. You can't force people to comply. And once you start forcing certain people to comply, to believe in your faith, it pushes more people away. You let them come, they fall astray, they lead themselves astray. You keep leading by example. They might come back, they might not, but at the end of the day, their destiny is up to them. It isn't up to you. They will fall, they will stumble, maybe learn their lesson and come back. But there is punishments for severe, I think, things that are just like, that's just too much. But sometimes you need to let people fail so that they can learn themselves how right you were, right? Essentially. That's how I look at it. Slavery was perhaps the only issue as emotionally and politically charged in Virginia as religion. Jefferson's experience with the question of emancipation in the General Assembly affirmed the tragic view that he had come to when he had earlier failed to make progress against slavery in the House of Burgess. A view further validated when the delegate to the Continental Congress had cut his attack on the slave trade from the Declaration of Independence. You see? He had an attack on the slave trade. I remember reading that in one of my classes, the original one, and they just couldn't get people on board at that time in high enough numbers to take on the crown, so they had to make a compromise. It was either, do you compromise on that, and then we fight to defeat England, or we don't compromise and England rules us and makes us all vassals of them, right? Because I'm pretty sure the English would have continued slavery, right? So the world was what it was, and now we're doing much better. Except now you have forms of wage slavery coming up, especially in places like China. So now there's a different form of slavery, right? Debt slavery, minimum wage job slavery. we should find a better word for that because it degrades the brutality of slavery. We need to find a better word to call that. At the General Assembly, as part of the revisal of the laws, Jefferson and his allies prepared an amendment stipulating the freedom of all slaves born after a certain day, and deportation at a proper age. Deportation because it was inconceivable to Jefferson that free whites and free blacks could live together peacefully. Oh, I think because that way, I've heard this explained where they say, because you've had that dominating culture, the people who were alive at that time, if you free the slaves, they wouldn't respect the slaves because they were trained and indoctrinated to see them as slaves, and the slaves would see themselves as always having to compete with them. So if they separated them, they felt like they would do better. And it was truly sad. And some people, African American Black Power movements, said that they did better under segregation, which is really sad. That we needed to, I don't say we needed to do it. It's awful. But some people say it was worse, it was better. White people say it, blacks say it. There's all different opinions on the spectrum. But I heard that historically, that's what people argued for. I think that's sad. They should have just let them all live together. You didn't need to segregate. Get to learn to love, get to see each other, live around each other. And I think you'll get bonded to each other quicker than if you separate, you otherize each other, right? And then you can't integrate fast enough.